someone I was just talking with randomly out of the blue. We were just messaging, um, and they were talking about how they were building their reports slash dashboards, uh, and they were going against the Postgres database. So I had asked them essentially like the dashboards slash reporting. Basically, it was a reporting infrastructure that they were building, or reporting sets of tools that they were building against. And as far as like how often, it was more of a case where they wouldn't need these reports as real time. If they were an hour and off, if they were 1 hour off or 2 hours off for that matter, they were cool with it basically. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Well, I mean, like some of the dashboards that they were building, it was like Node stuff basically. A lot of the Node, JS JavaScript files that they were building the quote unquote dashboards off of essentially. Uh, and so it was a case of, all right, that's pretty cool. But he was saying something along the lines like, yeah, some of their tools, processes that are writing to the databases were taking a bit longer than usual, basically. And I was like, okay. He was kind of asking me my expertise a little bit as far as like, what's going on, essentially. And I was like, all right, I say, without having to like log into his system, I just told him, I was like, hey, look, so is it on a VM? He's like, no, it's kind of on a managed, managed instance service. Basically, they were using AWS RDS. Basically, I'm like, okay, shouldn't I'm not a little confused as why that would happen, but I was like, okay. So then I asked him like, uh, to the point of like, all right, just take a look at the log, see what's going on a little bit. He's like, yeah, there's. I was like, do you see any logs going on? He's like, yeah, like something was wrong. He's like, yeah, there's some logs going on. I'm like, okay, what do you see that's going on? He's like, well, a lot of our, like a lot of the writes that are going to the tables are being read off of. So it's basically like some, locking that was occurring basically, but it was more of select locks, like dirty read. I mean, just basically read locks more than anything else. And I was like, okay, so like, are you running queries against that data, like against it basically from other processes? Like, yeah, it was the reporting infrastructure basically. And like, it was sort of like some ad hoc queries as well too, more ad hoc reporting basically. And I was like, wait, what? And then I told him like, okay, why don't you just have another instance basically? He was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, this database that you have right now is more of your transactional ledger type of database basically. He was telling me. And I'm like, that's the case. I'm like, why would you want to read reports against it? And he was like, well, I need him. And I was like, okay, but you just said that they're not real time. They're like 1 to 2 hours behind, like they're 1 to 2 hours basically. So like, it's not necessary for it to be up to date basically. And some of the processes that do run against it are pulling data, but they're pulling data as well as pushing data into it as well too, but for like sort of summary aggregates basically. And I was like, okay, so wait, you have your summary aggregates databases or tables, as well as your transactional ledgers from the web aspect, essentially going into the same database. I'm like, okay, why not just break the databases into two different things? And he was asking me what aspect, and I was telling him like, well, like have the ledger basically in that aspect, with the transactional stuff, and like you say that you do the reconciliation at the end of the day anyways, and there's an ETL process that basically reads off that database, right? So why not just have that pull the data off of there, process whatever you need to process, and throw it into this kind of like reporting database, basically. And he was like, well, yeah, but that's adding an extra layer. I'm like, yes, but you're essentially creating a reporting database infrastructure that basically a reporting database specifically just for reports and dashboards. And then I told them like, okay, wait, if you're running only just queries, ad hoc queries at that point, then okay, fine. Then you could just have, fine, you could just have it in that database. Then at that point, and from there, you could also just essentially do a read-only database essentially. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, like have as I said basically, you'll have your primary and your secondary databases, where your primary database is everything that's going on, writing to it, writing to it, basically more than anything else. It's like your ledger transactional data that's going on there, and then you have your ledger database. Well, not ledger database. Sorry, your read-only database or your quote-unquote reporting database, and let the reports run off of that. Because if they're an hour, if you don't mind them being an hour behind, so then why not just read off the data anyways? I'm like, just do essentially replication. So let the data replicate between the two, and then go off of that basically. Uh, he was a little stumped as to what I was telling him, describing to him, and I'm like, wait a minute, hold on, this is stuff that's been around for ages, practically ages. Uh, and I was like, okay, why were you, like who set this up essentially? He's like, well, he said some developer in the beginning did this, prior to this, and like they basically set it up as such. So I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a repeating, writing and reporting and ledger database at the same time. I'm like, all right, well, was this person like a consultant? It seems like he wasn't a consultant, but yet it seems like it wasn't a consultant. It was a full time hire, but it was a full time hire from some kid coming out of college, and it was a case where like it was sort of one of those. I don't want to say coding academies, like I forgot the name of the company, Flatiron or whatever it is. I forgot what it was called, but it was one of those coding academies basically, and like some of the stuff that he done was interesting, but at the same time, it was one of those things where some of the stuff that he didn't do, it's more of a case like he just basically put it up there based on stuff that he learned. And I was like a little surprised. I'm like, okay, I'm surprised he didn't use Mongo for that matter, to be quite honest. I told him, it's like, yeah, they said basically he wasn't too comfortable working in Mongo. He loved working with Postgres, which by in itself, okay, not a problem there. But then the question is like, I was asking, it's like, all right, but if you have so much data coming in, basically, if you have this transactional database going and occurring to the point where you're going back and forth with the transactions, why would you read off of it as well too? Why not just have a reporting database, a set replicate database or replicates database SIS, and read, like one for reporting purposes and one for like, your actual ETL reconciliation at the end of the day type of thing as well too. Let them replicate over, and then you just pull over. And like if it's an hour to 2 hours behind, you said it's not a problem. If it's real time, all right, fine. If you need some real time statistics at that point as well too, to be quite honest. I mean, there's also a case where like you could just put data into like sort of a pub sub like Kafka and read off of that, bits and pieces off of that a little bit as well too. Or two, I said like, all right, if you're on AWS, why not use Redshift or Snowflake? I mean, in this situation of like, it's not that big of a, big databases, like it's the databases wasn't, based on what he was telling me, it wasn't that large. It was like no more than like 2 TB. So I'm like, that's almost nothing nowadays, basically. You could have put that into a Snowflake or Redshift database environment, have that as your reporting database. So long as these are canned summary tables, basically, then you could just write off them at that point too. But yeah, I would say basically it's something that I think some young developers coming out of college or out of these coding academies are not always familiar with. When you have a heavy production database that's more specifically for like creating, keeping the transactions or sort of like ledger type of thing, basically in a ways, or some aspects of like, it's in, like more of, again, transactional where you need to support ACID, but you don't need, and you have a reporting environment that you need in place as well too. Set the reporting environment to a replicate database, a read-only database. That replicate read-only database is good perfectly for ad hoc queries as well too. So like if you need people to run queries against, just run against that versus the actual transactional. If you need absolute real-time streaming type of data, then use a pub sub at that moment and then read off that pub sub from that perspective. I mean, like Kafka makes perfect sense. You can read off the certain topics based on the certain partitions of that data that came in, boom, and read off of that at that point. But yeah, honestly, it was something relatively new, not new, but something that was relatively old that I thought was common knowledge nowadays. I mean, to be honest, for me, it's something that was so old, so 2000-ish in a ways that's all it was ever used for at that point. So I think there were some fundamentals that are being lost when kids coming out of college, in that aspect. I mean, they know the deep level stuff as like as far as functional programming, as far as some new data structures and such. But at the same time, it's one of those things where they're not always familiar with certain things when it comes to like scalability. And I think they have to learn on the hard way. In this case, this person didn't. I want to say kid, but I don't know how old the person was when they hired him, and like as far as when they set it up, it could have been a 35-year-old to 40-year-old. That's for all I know as well too. And then that person left to join another company to do bigger, better things, or make more money. I don't know, whatever it may be. But in any case, like again, Read-only databases, perfect for your reporting environments. Um, like, subscribe, comment, any feedback. If you comment, great. I'll try to comment back or reply back to it. Those comments. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment as well too, and I'll try to reply back to it. If you feel that I'm wrong, um, go ahead and leave that comment as well too. I'd love to discuss. I would. Discussions are great. I love open criticisms. To be honest with you, I love to be critiqued. Some people say they don't. I do because it's the only way you learn and grow. Um, Again, unedited, unfiltered, and unrehearsed. Until next time.